set the stage here in terms of why do we care about Greenland so much, because I think that'll help you, Matt, when you go into that broader picture. Um, I think for a lot of folks, you hear Greenland, you say, okay, it's a big country, great, but it's in the middle of nowhere. Why do I really care, right? I think the first thing that everybody jumps to is obviously defense. So first up, I have here just a map of the Arctic Circle. So we're talking about, why is the U.S., why is Trump been so adamant that we need Greenland in order to secure up our Arctic Circle worries from, let's say, Russia and China and other countries. I think this is the first one, which is if you look at it from this angle, you see Greenland is actually in a pretty unique position, besides Canada and Alaska, to be able to detect incoming missiles. I'm not going to take credit for this. I put soft news. They focus mostly on military related news articles and analyses, but you can see here from Russia, if they were to shoot some type of a missile over into North America, you'd have a pretty good early warning system based on having Greenland in the middle there. Secondarily, naval defense. This photo shows the strait between Greenland, Iceland, and then over to the Faroe Islands, and then the United Kingdom. Again, so this is mostly about ships, let's say a Navy ship or a submarine moving through these areas. If you have bases on Greenland, it makes it much easier to actually detect when these are actually moving through those straits. We already know that there's a lot going on in terms of submarines. I think we touched on some of the tech that's going into this a while back in terms of what China's developing on the seabed. You can only imagine the U.S. is probably doing the same. So again, Greenland becomes a major worry here. Further, I don't know about you guys, but here in Seattle, it's been an extremely warm winter. I love skiing, but have not been able to really go because it's been completely warm at the top of the mountain. I think I checked the weather yesterday. It's supposed to be like 40 degrees on the summit. So we're going to have melting snow conditions, things like that. As you think about what's going on in the next decade, 20, 30 years, you can imagine some of this area in the Arctic is going to be a little bit easier to traverse with submarines and Navy ships. Third, shipping lanes related to the Navy, but obviously there's a lot of economic pieces tied up in all of this. This kind of shows some of these routes currently with more of that ice kind of melting. You're going to be able to get more ships to more places. Greenland, again, if you notice, is in this interesting location where if you have bases, if you have ports there, could be an interesting thing to be able to handle more trade routes. And then finally, minerals. Some of this is already proven reserves. I'm not going to get into exact details, things like that, but there's also a large amount of these minerals that are currently under ice or very difficult and uneconomic to get to. But if some of that ice were to melt, or if it becomes more economic to mine these, let's say price goes up on any of these minerals, Greenland has massive deposits of all of these that are being called out here. So I think, again, this is just the why do we care about Greenland? Greenland is not just some random country off, in the north somewhere. It's truly an actual military and economic valuable resource that all countries want, not just the U.S. And you're seeing a lot of that play out with recently France and Germany sending troops over to Greenland. So that's that EU and UK claim, the E3 that Matt will probably touch on. And then you've also seen China and Russia obviously try to make inroads as well. So again, a lot of eyes on Greenland moving forward. But Matt, maybe take it from there. That sets us up for why do we care, but how does this fit into the bigger picture?
Yeah, so I'm going to try to do this to cover, probably about 7 centuries of history here up to this point in a minute. All right. Why does Greenland even under acclaimed sovereign possession of Denmark itself, right? It just what's going on? I think for the broad public, it's hard to wrap your head around this. Denmark's claim over this island goes back to pre-Columbus, like it's pre-1492. This goes back to like Kalmar Union. I mean, like kind of post-Viking era. You had basically a unification under I guess the kings or monarchs of Denmark over most of the Scandinavian peninsula, some of the islands that Cameron's talking about here, Iceland, Faroe Islands, etc., and then Greenland as well. This goes back, I mean, 700, 800 years on that claim. It predates your other Western European powers kind of setting sail and colonizing or claiming as colonies. I mean, the Western Hemisphere primarily, which we'll focus on, but also the rest of the world in general. So Spain doesn't, start heading west until 1492. So this is old stuff we're talking about here. This, flag plant, you can kind of trace back the this specific sovereign claim to like the 1700s, but it really goes back even further than that. That's why this thing is still under, Denmark, which I'd consider, from a kind of a regional perspective, like a city state, Copenhagen as your center, it's below the fold. Like it would rank below, London, Paris, Amsterdam. You can count Spain, Italy. It would Switzerland. It would be far. Germany, you got to get to. If you're sort descend, ranking the European kind of city states based on who has more power and influence under this giant regional blob that they're trying to consolidate into. Copenhagen, Denmark, they're not going to crack top five, and I don't think they ever will be. So they find themselves at an interesting point in history here. It's kind of like a family that used to be extremely wealthy. They're still somewhat wealthy. Like they're doing very well for themselves, very good per capita GDP. People are happy, all of that. But they're never going to be like a superpower ever again. In the foreseeable future, right? But they're sitting on some claim that is like highly valuable here. And now we get into like, why is this thing valuable? All right. So think about perspective. US is the upstart in the game. What it really represents is, think about all of that colonization that came in, Europe into the New World, the Western Hemisphere. The US is the one of those where the settlers kind of fought back and successfully have established their beachhead to self-sovereignty of like they're wealthy, they're people, like their sovereign claim on the land, and they don't have to answer to, someone else and pay tribute, all of that as a vassal state or suzerain, and like those types of setups. So what we're seeing now, in my opinion, all right, so American Revolution, right? We flip, we get the 13 colonies, their successful self-sovereignty, their right to govern, and basically kickstarts this massive experiment in self-governance. The British, the opposition side, they kind of push all of their legacy colonial interests north, and then over the next 100 years between American Revolution and Civil War, you gradually started to see this strategy where you're going to try the pincer move. You had, what became Canada in the north, your European colonial powers support the revolution from the south. And the great hope was they'd slowly, over time, just chip away, whittle away, boom, 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 before this American experiment failed upon itself. And you're back to the
Bring them
colonization
back into the
game.
fold. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
you're back in business, baby. All right. So what this represents, in my opinion, Civil War did not go the way the Europeans wanted it to, in my opinion. Um, and now we're at a point, I'm just going to skip over the 20th century. The US is actually, as everything is now back up in the air, everything's on the table. We go through periods of, stability, and then there's instability, decades where, or weeks where decades happen, and Lenin's quote. Um, like what the US is actually going after here in Greenland, in my opinion, if the US, absorbs or integrates Greenland into its, self-sovereign sphere, you've now got a pincer move, a reverse pincer move, if you will, of what the Europeans, the French, etc., of all of their legacy loyalist resources in Canada wanted to set up in terms of, we talked about the play in the 1800s, the long game. it's kind of the exact opposite of that. So it's in wrestling terms, it's a reversal, right? So if the U.S. can butt in, integrate Greenland, it's got all of this strategic importance, naval, international trade routes, potentially minerals if we can economically extract them. Um, it's a win on all three fronts. But in the big game, the Western Hemisphere establishing its own self-governance, self-rule without foreign influence, Greenland is a huge piece, in my opinion. So that's how view this. This is how it's going on. Well, we are getting developments here. It's just beginning, right? You heard in Trump first administration, you heard this Greenland idea floated. Everybody wrote it off. Nothing really happened. We're in the phase where it's going to start picking up. If it comes to like kinetic confrontation, that's not the way anyone, I don't want
Right.
to
Oh,
say anyone,
definitely.
some people want it to go that way, but that's not the ideal way from the American perspective. And I'll, you know, raise my hand as uh, card carrying a supporter of the American experiment, all of that. So I don't think kinetic war is the best interest here, or the best way to accomplish this goal from the U.S. perspective. We do not want to see that happen. Over the long run, I think what you're going for is um, integrate via economic development, infrastructure investment, mineral resource deals, et cetera. And that's what you're starting to see floated in the just I mean, just live and weather what is really a harsh, tough place to live, let alone work, build up businesses, et cetera. But I think the first phase, the first 1 to 2 years, is going to focus on that economic development. And then the next stage, as this integration project kind of works towards its conclusion, talking about 5 to 10 years into the future, you'll start to see the security guarantees become more and more important. So this is where, all right, the U.S. demonstrating that it offers the only viable, option for both the European, you can call them partners, with the U.S. They've been on both sides of that book over the last 250 years. So I don't take them as fully reliable partners to the degree I think that others do, but that's just me showing my bias, I guess. Um, but either way, I think there is aligned interest on defending Greenland from the Northern European perspective as well as the U.S. perspective. And you see the scapegoat here. It's showing up in Trump's remarks. Um, Russia and China, right? It's like, all right, if we don't protect it, Russia and China are going to come in and take it. So better in our hands. That's where I think over the next 2 years, 3 years, you'll start to see those security guarantees come into play. Um, and I think the immediate reaction we saw with Denmark kind of recruiting and blessing military officers, reconnaissance personnel, all of that into Greenland. This was Yesterday, January 15th. That's kind of your first stage of, hey, the security thing is discussions, all of that agreements. It's starting up right now. So, in terms of the U.S. pulling this one off successfully, I would say if you rank what are the ways that, or what are the biggest inhibitors to the U.S. achieving that ultimate outcome? I'd say number one, the most likely is that unified EU response. And I think what this positions itself under the hood, the actual story, if you read between the headlines here, is that to increase its chances of the U.S. successfully accomplishing this goal, you're now at the financial plane. Indirect opposition with the euro, if you will. Also, the British pound, the Bank of England. But this firmly puts basically the U.S. Treasury, the domestic United States own monetary architecture, which we've talked about as being in a state of transition itself, in direct opposition with the ECB, European Council, et cetera. I think so. Without taking this into an escalation, maintain partnership on security through NATO, et cetera. This is the U.S. EU relationship and U.S. UK relationship as well by proxy are really kind of one of the key, what would you call it, like just knife's edge points as we
Pivot
work through
points.
this
Yep.
this big transition that we're into. I'm talking like big picture of this era. Your other ones, if you sort descend, Greenland resistance, it's 57,000 people. They're just looking for better lives. I think they'll go one way or the other. NATO collapse. I think it's actually not in the US's interest here for NATO to collapse in itself rapidly. I think in the long run, this alliance is probably past its shelf life, but in the
Not
immediate
long for the
term,
world. Yeah.
yeah, in the immediate term, like, is it going to collapse tomorrow? Um, US doesn't want to see this collapse like immediately. It wants to kind of renegotiate, set up all the, plug in the wires, connect the dots, all of that on its own terms, which is going to take longer. Um, Danish military action, not going to happen. The Denmark's ability to compete with the U.S. on this front is
Exactly.
it's not a serious matter. International condemnation, you could get this like UN Security Council vetoes, headlines, etc., but they don't do anything. There's nothing actually there in terms of what 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 uh, what the popular accomplish, in my opinion, towards stopping the U.S. from accomplishing its objectives. And then Chinese Russian counter pressure. I think that's actually a good scapegoat here for the U.S. It gives a face to the adversary. It goes right into the point. Hey, you need us for security here, Russia and China. They're the boogeyman. Um, so all these things continue to watch, but if you start seeing more partnership, more deals, et cetera, in Greenland, don't be surprised. It's kind of that same story we've been saying. U.S. Treasury, U.S. White House outreach with Argentina, integrate them in the orbit. We saw what happened in Venezuela at the first weekend of the new year. The net of that story is Venezuela is being integrated into the U.S. Sphere. I'd say look for that same outcome out of Greenland. The way we get there is economic development. Throw $100 billion at the problem. What's the other one, Cameron? I'm looking for. Oh, the minerals deals as well. Same thing we saw.
Yep.
If you go back in Ukraine, probably the 100th most important headline out of the Ukraine topic this year. But if you remember, there was a Ukraine minerals deal back in, I think, May of 2025. So watch
That's
for
right.
those. It'll be pushing in the same direction. It's a mining story. You've got minerals, but it's also trade, right? Trade is the key kind of lifeblood of a financial system, of economic progress, all of that stuff. So keep watching for that. Greenland has entered the chat as far as the big state of volatility and upheaval that we're living through.